Do you need to tell a medical device regulator about every change you make to your software as a medical device? This is a common question I'm asked by medical device software developers, especially those that are new to the market. In Australia and many other countries, the short answer is no. A more useful answer is that you do typically need to tell medical device regulators about changes that are reportable under the legislation or have an impact on safety or performance of the product. Most jurisdictions have reportability requirements, which are typically adverse events, recalls, and things like that. And for some products, usually ones with high classifications, you often need to disclose significant changes to the design, and you may actually need to get them assessed. Now, importantly, different jurisdictions have different reportability requirements. This is one place where there's often different details in each country, so you do need to look at the requirements for the markets you're in. If you are in multiple markets, don't assume that they're harmonised. Okay? You often need to report slightly different things or slightly different information to different regulators. However, the underlying point is that the expectation on you as a developer of medical device software, including SaMD, is the same as the expectation that's on manufacturers of physical medical devices. You're expected to assess the risk associated with your product and assess it against the regulatory requirements. You're also expected to assess any changes you make to the product, the risk associated with those changes. You're expected to control those changes using design control, and you're expected to control production and release of those changes and do some change management. Now, that all depends slightly on the conformity assessment procedures you use. For example, you don't always have to do design control, but with software there's almost always some level of design documentation. Now, that all includes deciding if this thing is reportable and needs to be reported to the regulator. It also is how you decide if it needs to be assessed, because you've checked the regulatory requirements and found out, no, this is a specific change that this regulator says needs to be assessed. In practice, regulators are concerned about changes to products that affect safety of the patients or the users of that product, increase the risk, or somehow change the essential performance. These changes are typically changes that bring in new features, change the clinical indications, or somehow otherwise increase the scope of use for the product. However, there are some additional requirements for products that have been examined, which I mentioned before. So in Australia, that's Class 3 products who can't enter the market without undergoing a design examination. And there's then a requirement that if you make a change to the design of that product, a significant change, you will need to get that assessed by the regulator. Now, the regulations tell you significant change, and that's on you to determine, but the regulator will assist you if you're unsure. Minor updates, purely cosmetic updates, and other similar corrections often won't need any engagement with the regulator. But you need to keep in mind that cosmetic changes can affect usability and accessibility of your product, which can then feed on to impact on the risk associated with your product. The underlying message is you need to assess the risk and determine what action is required if you're going to go forward with this update. Now, people are often surprised when I give this answer. Their interpretation is, well, that means I get through the gate and then I can change what I want when I feel like it. Now, that's not true either. If you've got a medical device on the market, you've probably been through conformity assessment or a similar process by a medical device regulator, and you've been certified as a developer to make that type of product. Now, that decision to certify you was based on the fact that you had a quality management system with appropriate processes for controlling the design and manufacture of your product. For software, they probably looked at your software development lifecycle to make sure it was appropriate. Okay? Now you've got all these processes in place and you're required to use them. This is where risk management feeds in as an underlying layer, because you're risk assessing your products all the time, you're assessing them against regulatory requirements all the time if you're following the QMS processes that have been assessed and certified by the regulator. Importantly, regulators don't just audit you once. They do audit you when you enter the market or when you first get your certification, but they come back for surveillance audits. They also come back to recertify you when your certificate expires. So they have plenty of opportunities to have a look at your QMS and see if you are doing all these risk assessments, to see if you are controlling changes appropriately, telling your customers and managing the risk. So the underlying message there is that you will get caught if you aren't doing these things, and that the key thing is risk management and understanding the risk that the changes you're going to make are going to have on your customers. Auditing is not the only tool regulators have. They do their own post-market surveillance. They receive complaints from your customers. They receive complaints from your competitors' customers. Now this means even if there's no complaints about your product, there might be a pattern of problems with your competitors' products, and the regulator might just decide to investigate you all as a group. That usually happens when regulators see a pattern, because they see signals across the whole market. You only see the signals you have access to. Your competitors don't tell you about their problems and you don't tell them about yours. Okay? But the regulator sees all of that. It's also important to understand that there are consequences if you are found to not be following your own QMS processes, because that makes you non-compliant. And regulators have a spectrum of tools here. They can do minor things like enforcing a correction or a rollback, or they could take you off the market, or there could be civil or criminal penalties in extreme cases. So back to the original question, no, you typically don't have to tell the regulator about every change you make to your SaMD product, every update that you push out, but you do need to risk assess those updates and determine the impact on your customers. This could include, or this should include, determining what action you need to take, which might be just informing your customers about the update and the reasons for it. It might be taking action to enforce the update and make it a correction. It almost always involves documenting the change itself and the justification or reason for the change. And it may involve things like tracking how many people applied the update. Okay, customers ignore software updates all the time. In your case, that could lead to harm. So if you see that only 70% of your customers have applied the update, that means 30% of your customers are potentially still at risk if you've just pushed that update to fix a problem. And of course, there may be a requirement to tell the regulator or to have that change assessed. It's getting repetitive, but the expectation is on you to continually assess yourself and your products. Medical device frameworks in many countries give manufacturers and developers a lot of flexibility to innovate. This is good because we get new products, innovative products, better products that solve problems that haven't been solved before. It also means that manufacturers and developers can continually improve their products without the burden of continual assessment. However, that's balanced by the responsibility on you as a developer to continually assess yourself, your QMS processes and your products, not just against best practice but against the regulatory requirements, and to tell the people that need to know about updates and deviations. So now, with all that in mind, do you need to tell the regulator about the change you're making to your SaMD today? Is it a reportable change? Is it in response to an adverse incident? Have you assessed the risk that this change poses to your existing customers? And what are you going to tell your customers when you push this update out? I'm Dr. Lee Walsh from Platypus Technical. See you next time.